Dr. Ethan Blackwood had dedicated his career to preventing extinctions, but he'd never expected to receive a transmission that would ask him to personally participate in species preservation through what amounted to interplanetary reproductive assistance. The message from Ethermore had been cryptic: xenobiologist required for critical species continuation protocols. Time sensitive. Compensation negotiable. Survival of civilization depends on immediate response. Now, standing on the observation deck of his research vessel as it entered Ethermore's deteriorating atmosphere, Ethan wondered if he'd made a serious error in judgment by responding to a distress call from a planet that looked like it was being torn apart by forces that defied known physics. The world below showed signs of catastrophic environmental collapse that shouldn't have been possible according to standard planetary science. Massive atmospheric rifts split the sky like wounds in reality itself. Gravitational anomalies created floating islands of rock and vegetation that drifted through space without regard for normal orbital mechanics, and the planet's surface pulsed with energy patterns that made his instruments register readings somewhere between "impossible" and "please recalibrate everything." "Dr. Blackwood," came the voice of his ship's AI, "I'm detecting a single life form at the coordinates specified in the transmission. Human-adjacent physiology, but with energy signatures that don't match any known species in our databases." "Human-adjacent how?" Ethan asked, preparing his field equipment while trying to process the visual data streaming from his sensors. "Bipedal, approximately human proportions, but with cellular activity that appears to be consciously directed rather than autonomically regulated. Also, the energy reading suggests this individual is somehow connected to the planetary disturbances we're observing." Ethan's landing shuttle touched down on what appeared to be crystalline cliffs that jutted from the planet's surface like frozen music, their faceted surfaces reflecting light that seemed to come from within rather than from Ethermore's dying sun. The atmosphere was breathable but charged with energy that made his hair stand on end and his equipment emit soft humming sounds. She was waiting for him at the edge of what might once have been a city, though the structures around her looked more like they'd been grown than built. Organic curves and flowing lines that suggested architecture designed by someone who understood the relationship between form and natural force in ways human engineering had never achieved. Lady Lyralii Starweaver, she'd identified herself in subsequent transmissions. Stood with her back to him, draped in robes that seemed to shift between dark fabric and starlight depending on the angle of observation. When she turned to face him, Ethan felt his scientific worldview take a sharp left turn into territory his training hadn't prepared him for. She appeared human in most respects, but with ears that swept upward in elegant points and eyes that held depth suggesting they reflected light from different dimensions. Her skin carried a faint luminescence that made her seem lit from within, and when she moved, the air around her shimmered with energy patterns that his instruments registered as biologically generated electromagnetic fields. "Dr. Blackwood," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in his chest cavity, "thank you for responding to my transmission. I am the last of the Sylvani, and I need your help to prevent the complete extinction of my species." "Lady Starweaver," Ethan replied, trying to maintain professional composure despite the growing certainty that this situation would challenge everything he thought he understood about biology and physics. "I specialize in conservation genetics and endangered species preservation. What exactly are we dealing with here?" Lyralii gestured toward the failing landscape around them, where floating islands drifted through air that sparkled with what appeared to be conscious energy. "My people were not simply advanced beings, Dr. Blackwood. We were practitioners of biological magic, the conscious direction of life force to achieve effects your science would consider impossible." "Biological magic," Ethan repeated, his training in xenobiology helping him stay focused despite the conceptual vertigo of having his understanding of reality fundamentally challenged. "Are we talking about advanced biotechnology that appears magical, or actual manipulation of natural forces through conscious will?" "The latter," Lyralii said with what might have been amusement at his attempt to fit impossible phenomena into familiar categories. "Sylvani magic operates through genetic predisposition combined with conscious focus to direct life energy in ways that can heal, create, or transform living matter. Our entire civilization was built on the harmony between individual will and cosmic force." Ethan looked around at the environmental collapse surrounding them, noting the way atmospheric rifts seemed to pulse in rhythm with Lyralii's breathing. And this environmental damage? The result of population collapse below the critical threshold required to maintain our planet's magical ecosystem, Lyralii explained, pain evident in her voice despite her attempt at clinical description. Sylvani magic isn't individual, it's collective. Our abilities require a minimum population to sustain the energy fields that keep our world stable. When my people began dying from a plague that resisted both medical treatment and magical healing, the planetary balance started failing. How many Sylvani remain? Ethan asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer from her description of herself as the last. One, Lyralii said simply. Me. The final carrier of genetic sequences that took millennia to develop, the last repository of magical knowledge that could transform how all species approach the relationship between consciousness and biological function. Ethan felt the weight of that admission settle into his chest like a physical burden. As a conservation biologist, he'd worked with endangered species throughout his career, but he'd never encountered a situation where the extinction of an entire species rested on the survival of a single individual. Lady Starweaver, he said carefully, what exactly are you asking me to do? My expertise is in genetic analysis and reproductive assistance, but if you're the only remaining member of your species, I'm asking you to help me continue the Sylvani through hybrid offspring, Lyralii interrupted, her luminous eyes meeting his with intensity that made breathing more difficult. Dr. Blackwood, I've spent my final years researching genetic compatibility between Sylvani and other species. Human DNA contains dormant sequences that could potentially carry our magical traits if activated through appropriate reproductive processes. Ethan stared at her, his scientific mind racing through implications while his human psychology struggled with the personal nature of what she was proposing. You're talking about interspecies reproduction to create hybrid children who could inherit Sylvani magical abilities. I'm talking about the only remaining method for preventing the complete loss of biological capabilities that could revolutionize how all galactic civilization approaches environmental stewardship, medical treatment, and the conscious direction of natural forces, Lyralii said. Dr. Blackwood, my people could heal injuries through focused will, accelerate plant growth to prevent famine, and maintain atmospheric stability through collective magical effort. Those abilities die with me unless I can pass them to offspring capable of continuing our work. But why me specifically? Ethan asked, trying to process the magnitude of what she was suggesting. Surely there are other humans who would be interested in this opportunity. Lyralii moved closer, and Ethan caught the scent that accompanied her presence, something like starlight and growing things, alien but oddly comforting. Because genetic compatibility isn't enough, Dr. Blackwood. Successful magical integration requires emotional and intellectual connection between partners. Your work in conservation biology demonstrates the kind of dedication to species preservation that magical ability amplifies rather than corrupts. Plus, your scientific training will help you understand and assist with the complex biological processes involved in human Sylvani integration. Integration, Ethan repeated, sensing deeper implications in her word choice. The process that would grant our children magical abilities would also transform you, Dr. Blackwood. You would become part Sylvani yourself, gaining extended lifespan and the ability to consciously direct biological functions in ways your species has never achieved. Ethan looked at the dying world around them, at the woman whose species' survival depended on his decision, and at the floating islands that defied gravity through what she claimed was conscious will made manifest. His scientific training told him this was the discovery opportunity of several lifetimes. His human psychology suggested he was being asked to make a choice that would fundamentally alter everything he understood about his own existence. Lady Starweaver, he said finally, what happens if I say no? Then the Sylvani become extinct, their magical knowledge dies with me, and the galaxy loses capabilities that could prevent environmental disasters on hundreds of worlds. Lyralii's voice carried the weight of civilizations as she continued. And I die alone on a world that's already forgotten how to sustain life without the conscious will of beings who understood their connection to cosmic forces. Behind her, the sky split with another atmospheric rift, and Ethan realized that his decision would determine not just the fate of an individual or even a species, but potentially the future of biological possibility for all galactic civilization. Lyraliai's demonstration of Sylvani magic began with something simple, a withered plant growing from a crack in the crystalline cliffs. She knelt beside the dying vegetation, her hands hovering over leaves that crumbled at the slightest touch, and Ethan watched her eyes close in concentration that seemed to draw energy from somewhere beyond normal biological processes. The transformation happened gradually, then suddenly. New growth emerged from dead stems, leaves unfurled with vibrant green that shouldn't have been possible in Ethermore's failing atmosphere, and flowers bloomed in colors that seemed to incorporate starlight as pigmentation. But more remarkable than the healing itself was Ethan's ability to observe the process through his instruments, energy flowing from Lyraliai's consciousness into the plant's cellular structure, rewriting genetic damage and accelerating natural healing through focused will that operated according to principles his science couldn't explain. Biological magic, Lyraliai said, opening her eyes to reveal exhaustion that suggested the demonstration had cost her significantly. Conscious direction of life force to achieve effects that transcend normal limitations. My people could heal any injury, accelerate growth processes, and even modify genetic expression through focused intention combined with inherited ability. Ethan knelt beside the revitalized plant, running his scanner over vegetation that now showed impossible levels of cellular activity and genetic stability. This defies everything I understand about biology. The energy expenditure alone should have killed you, but your vital signs show elevated activity rather than depletion. Magic operates through connection to cosmic forces rather than individual energy reserves, Lyraliai explained, though her pale complexion suggested she was drawing on resources that weren't unlimited. However, maintaining that connection requires minimum population thresholds. As the last of my people, I'm accessing power meant to be shared among thousands. Each use of magic weakens me further. How much time do we have? Ethan asked, his scientific training helping him focus on practical concerns despite the revolutionary implications of what he'd witnessed. Weeks, perhaps months, Lyraliai said, rising with movements that showed careful energy conservation. Long enough to complete the integration process if you agree to help me preserve my species through hybrid offspring. She led him deeper into what remained of the Sylvani city, through passages that seemed to flow like frozen water and chambers that hummed with residual magical energy. The architecture suggested a civilization that had achieved perfect harmony between technology and natural forces. Structures that seemed grown rather than built, lighting that responded to emotional states rather than simple activation, and environmental systems that maintained perfect atmospheric conditions through conscious will rather than mechanical processes. Dr. Blackwood, Lyraliai said, stopping before a crystalline chamber that pulsed with soft light, I need to show you the true scope of what I'm asking. The chamber contained what appeared to be a seed the size of a human heart, suspended in a matrix of energy that made Ethan's instruments register readings that fluctuated between impossible and, please seek immediate technical support. The artifact pulsed with life that seemed conscious, responding to their presence with increased luminosity that cast patterns across the chamber walls. The seed of continuance, Lyraliai said, her voice carrying reverence that suggested she was displaying something sacred. Biomystical artifact containing the concentrated genetic and magical essence of my entire species. Everything needed to restart Sylvani civilization through hybrid offspring who could inherit both human adaptability and our magical capabilities. Ethan approached the seed with scientific caution, noting how his instruments detected biological activity that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. What exactly does genetic and magical essence mean in practical terms? The collective genetic knowledge of 40,000 years of Sylvani evolution, plus the accumulated magical understanding that allowed us to achieve conscious control over biological processes, Lyraliai explained. Your children, our children, would inherit not just magical ability, but the genetic memory of how to use those abilities constructively rather than destructively. Our children, Ethan repeated, testing the reality of what she was proposing. And the integration process you mentioned? Lyraliai turned to face him, her luminous eyes reflecting depths of loneliness and desperate hope. Successful magical integration requires more than simple reproduction, Dr. Blackwood. It demands emotional and spiritual bonding that allows magical energy to flow between partners. The process would create permanent psychic links that enable the transfer of mystical abilities, but it would also fundamentally alter your human physiology. Alter how? You would become part Sylvani yourself. Extended lifespan measured in centuries rather than decades, ability to consciously direct your own biological functions, intuitive understanding of magical principles that operate through will rather than technology. Lyralii paused, studying his face for reaction. The transformation is irreversible, Dr. Blackwood. You would never be entirely human again. Ethan looked at the seed of continuance, processing implications that stretched far beyond personal choice. The magical abilities Lyralii described could revolutionize medicine, environmental science, and humanity's understanding of consciousness itself. But accepting her proposal would mean abandoning his human identity for something unprecedented and unknown. What would the integration process involve, he asked, his scientific curiosity overriding personal concerns. Psychic bonding that creates permanent connection between our consciousness patterns, Lyralii said. Physical intimacy that allows magical energy to flow between us during conception. Emotional commitment that sustains the magical links necessary for our children to inherit full Sylvani abilities. You're talking about marriage, Ethan said, recognizing the implications of what she was describing. I'm talking about partnership that transcends normal reproductive arrangements, Lyralii corrected. The magical bonds created during integration make separation psychologically harmful to both partners. We would be connected for the remainder of our extended lifespans, sharing consciousness, emotions, and magical abilities in ways that create true unity rather than simple companionship. Ethan felt the weight of the decision settling around him like atmospheric pressure. Accepting Lyralii's proposal would mean not just helping preserve her species, but committing to a relationship that would fundamentally alter his existence while taking responsibility for raising children whose abilities could reshape galactic civilization. How many children would be required, he asked, approaching the question with scientific methodology rather than emotional processing. Minimum viable population for magical ecosystem maintenance requires at least 12 individuals with specific genetic combinations, Lyralii said. Our children would develop rapidly due to accelerated magical metabolism, reaching maturity within a few human years rather than decades. But successful genetic integration would require multiple pregnancies with careful timing to ensure optimal magical trait expression. 12 children, Ethan repeated, processing the scope of the commitment. And they would all inherit magical abilities. If the integration process succeeds, yes. Our offspring would be capable of maintaining magical ecosystems, healing others through focused will, and advancing scientific understanding through intuitive comprehension of biological systems that operates beyond purely analytical methods. Ethan looked at Lyralii's face, noting the way her expression combined desperate hope with resigned acceptance of potential rejection. She was offering him the opportunity to participate in species preservation on a scale he'd never imagined, but also asking him to sacrifice his human identity for a future that would be unprecedented and uncertain. Lady Starweaver, he said carefully, if I agree to this, what guarantees do I have that the process will succeed? That our children will actually inherit the abilities you describe? None, Lyralii said with honesty that made him respect her even more. Interspecies magical integration has never been attempted. I'm proposing an experiment that could either create a new form of conscious evolution or fail catastrophically, leaving both our species diminished. Outside the chamber, another atmospheric rift split the sky with the sound of reality being torn apart, and Ethan realized that time was running out for both Lyralii and the magical knowledge her species had spent millennia developing. How long do I have to decide? He asked. The integration process requires several days of preparation, Lyralii said. Long enough for you to understand the full implications of what you're accepting, but not long enough for doubt to undermine the emotional commitment that makes magical bonding possible. Ethan nodded, his mind already racing through the scientific protocols he'd need to establish for documenting the most unprecedented reproductive assistance project in galactic history. The xenobiologist in him was fascinated by the opportunity to study interspecies magical integration from the inside. The human in him was terrified of losing his identity to something beyond his understanding. And somewhere deeper, he found himself drawn to the woman whose desperate hope and centuries of loneliness resonated with his own dedication to preventing extinctions that represented irreplaceable loss for all galactic civilization. The integration ritual took place in Lyraliai's sanctum, a crystalline chamber that served as the focal point for Ethermore's remaining magical energy. Ethan had spent 3 days preparing, studying Sylvani texts that existed more as living memories than written records, undergoing medical evaluations that documented his baseline human physiology, and trying to process the emotional reality of accepting transformation that would fundamentally alter his existence. "Are you certain about this decision?" Lyraliai asked as they stood before the seat of continuance, her luminous eyes reflecting both hope and concern for what she was asking him to sacrifice. "Once the integration begins, the changes to your consciousness and physiology will be irreversible." "I'm certain," Ethan replied, though his voice carried the tremor of someone stepping off the edge of known reality. "The opportunity to preserve your species and gain magical abilities that could benefit all galactic civilization outweighs the personal risks." "This isn't just about species preservation, Ethan," Lyraliai said, using his first name for the first time since they'd met. "The bonding process creates permanent emotional and psychic connections. We would be partners in every sense, sharing thoughts, feelings, and magical energy for the remainder of our extended lifespans." Ethan looked at the woman who'd asked him to help save her people through reproduction that would transform them both, noting the way her magical abilities seemed to increase her beauty while revealing depths of character that made conventional attraction feel inadequate. "I understand the commitment, Lyraliai. And I want to be clear that I'm not agreeing just for scientific opportunity. I'm choosing partnership with you because I've come to care about your well-being beyond professional interest." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross, but which felt like natural progression from days of intimate conversation about species preservation, magical theory, and the loneliness that came from being the only person capable of preventing irreplaceable loss. "I care about you too," Lyraliai said softly, her consciousness already reaching out to touch his in ways that suggested the integration process was beginning. "More than I expected when I first contacted you for help." The ritual itself involved both technological precision and mystical focusing that challenged Ethan's understanding of how consciousness could direct physical processes. Lyraliai guided him through meditation techniques that opened his awareness to energy patterns he'd never perceived, while the seed of continuance pulsed with increasing intensity that seemed to respond to their emotional connection. "Feel the flow of life force between us," Lyraliai instructed, her hands touching his while magical energy began circulating through contact that felt like completing an electrical circuit. "Allow your consciousness to merge with mine while maintaining your individual identity." The transformation began as awareness expansion that let Ethan perceive reality through Sylvani's sensory capabilities. He could feel the planet's magical ecosystem struggling to maintain stability, sense the flow of energy through living systems that operated according to conscious will, and experience Lyraliai's centuries of existence as memories that became accessible without overwhelming his human psychological framework. But more profound than enhanced perception was the emotional bonding that accompanied magical integration. Through their merged consciousness, Ethan experienced Lyraliai's desperate loneliness as the last of her people, her guilt over surviving when others had died, and her fierce determination to preserve Sylvani knowledge through whatever means necessary. In return, she gained access to his human perspective, the excitement of scientific discovery, the satisfaction of successful conservation work, and the deep need for connection that had driven his response to her transmission. "I can feel your thoughts," Ethan said, marveling at the intimacy of shared consciousness while maintaining enough individual awareness to appreciate the unprecedented nature of what was happening. "And I can feel yours," Lyraliai replied, her mental voice carrying warmth that suggested she was as affected by their connection as he was. "Your human thought patterns are remarkably adaptive. Most species' consciousness operates according to fixed principles, but you seem capable of incorporating new perspectives without losing core identity." The physical transformation accompanied the consciousness bonding with sensations that felt like controlled evolution occurring at accelerated speed. Ethan's cellular structure adapted to accommodate magical energy flows, his nervous system integrated new pathways that allowed conscious direction of biological processes, and his metabolism shifted toward the extended lifespan that would allow centuries of partnership with Lyralii. "How do you feel?" Lyralii asked as the initial integration phase completed, leaving them connected through psychic bonds that felt as fundamental as breathing. "Different," Ethan said, testing his enhanced awareness and finding that he could now perceive the magical energy patterns that permeated everything around them. "But still myself. Like I've gained new capabilities without losing my human perspective." "That's exactly what should happen," Lyralii said with relief that suggested she'd been concerned about the process overwhelming his individual consciousness. Successful magical integration enhances rather than replaces existing identity. Their first child was conceived during the integration ritual, the magical energy flowing between them creating optimal conditions for hybrid development that combined human genetic adaptability with Sylvani magical predisposition. Through their shared consciousness, both parents could monitor the pregnancy's progress in ways that allowed real-time adjustments to ensure successful trait expression. "She's developing faster than normal human gestation," Ethan observed, his enhanced perception allowing him to sense their daughter's growth through magical awareness rather than medical scanning. "But the process feels controlled rather than rushed." "Sylvani metabolism accelerates development when magical energy is abundant," Lyralii explained, her hand resting over her abdomen where their child grew with vitality that seemed conscious. "Our daughter will reach physical maturity within 2 years rather than decades, but her magical abilities will require guidance from both parents to develop properly." The weeks following integration brought daily discoveries as Ethan learned to use his new magical abilities while helping Lyralii maintain Ethermore's failing ecosystem long enough to establish sustainable practices on other worlds. He found that his scientific training enhanced his magical development, analytical thinking combined with intuitive energy manipulation to create hybrid approaches that neither purely human nor purely Sylvani methods could achieve. "You're remarkably gifted for someone new to magical practice," Lyralii said, watching Ethan successfully heal damaged vegetation through focused will that incorporated both mystical energy and scientific understanding of biological processes. "Most beings require decades to achieve that level of conscious control. I think it's the combination of human curiosity and Sylvani magical awareness," Ethan replied, marveling at abilities that felt both natural and impossible. "Human psychology seems to adapt quickly to new possibilities when they're presented as expandable rather than replacement frameworks." Their daughter was born during Ethermore's final environmental collapse, emerging into a world that was dying while carrying abilities that could restore magical ecosystems on hundreds of other planets. Arya Starweaver Blackwood displayed remarkable capabilities from birth. Accelerating healing in others through touch, stabilizing atmospheric conditions through infant intuition, and communicating through emotional projection that suggested advanced consciousness development. "She's perfect," Lyralii said, cradling their daughter while magical energy flowed between all 3 family members in patterns that felt like music made visible. "Look at her, Ethan. She understands both human innovation and Sylvani wisdom from birth." Ethan gazed at his daughter, whose eyes held depths that reflected both species' heritage while displaying intelligence that suggested new possibilities for conscious evolution. "Arya, welcome to your complicated universe. You're going to help save a lot of worlds." As if responding to his voice, Arya's tiny hand grasped his finger while magical energy flowed between them with the warmth of family bonds that transcended species barriers. Through their shared consciousness, both parents felt their daughter's natural abilities beginning to develop in ways that combined the best aspects of human adaptability and Sylvani magical mastery. "One down, 11 to go," Ethan said with a smile that encompassed both the enormity of their commitment and his growing excitement about raising children whose abilities could revolutionize galactic civilization's approach to environmental stewardship. 11 more, Lyralii agreed, her luminous eyes bright with joy that suggested the desperate loneliness of centuries was finally healing through family connections that honored both their species' contributions to their children's remarkable heritage. Outside the sanctum, Ethermore's final atmospheric rift opened like a doorway to nowhere, but inside their crystalline chamber, 3 beings whose love had created new possibilities for conscious evolution prepared to establish a future where magic and science could work together to heal worlds that had forgotten how to sustain life through harmony between will and natural force. The evacuation from Ethermore took place as the planet's final magical stabilizers failed, atmospheric rifts consuming entire continents, while Ethan and Lyralii worked desperately to preserve everything salvageable from Sylvani civilization. Their daughter Arya, now 6 months old but displaying cognitive development equivalent to a human toddler, helped stabilize their transport ship's environmental systems through unconscious magical ability that suggested her hybrid nature was developing exactly as hoped. The gravitational anomalies are accelerating, Ethan reported, monitoring readings that showed Ethermore's physical structure beginning to collapse as magical forces that had maintained planetary integrity for millennia finally dissipated. We need to reach minimum safe distance before the cascade failure reaches critical mass. Almost finished, Lyralii said, using her remaining magical energy to transfer the last of the Sylvani archives into crystalline storage matrices that could preserve the information in formats their children would be able to access. 4,000 years of accumulated knowledge, compressed into something we can carry to our new home. Their destination was Verdania, a frontier world with abundant natural resources and environmental conditions suitable for establishing magical ecosystems that could sustain hybrid Sylvani development. The planet's colonial government had agreed to provide settlement space in exchange for Lyralii's expertise in biological magic that could accelerate terraforming processes and enhance agricultural productivity. But the journey to their new home was complicated by political realities that neither Ethan nor Lyralii had fully anticipated. Word of successful human-Sylvani integration had spread through diplomatic channels, attracting attention from governments and organizations who viewed magical abilities as potential assets to be controlled or threats to be contained. Dr. Blackwood, came the transmission from Admiral Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. Command requires immediate debriefing regarding your transformation and its implications for human security interests. Admiral, Ethan replied carefully, I'm currently in transit to establish a research colony focused on studying magical biological integration for peaceful applications. Any debriefing can be scheduled after we've completed initial settlement procedures. Dr. Blackwood, you've undergone irreversible physiological alterations that grant you abilities outside normal human parameters. Military protocol requires evaluation of potential security implications before you're permitted to establish independent operations. Lyralii looked up from feeding Arya, her enhanced senses detecting the stress in Ethan's voice despite his attempt to maintain diplomatic composure. They want to study us, she said through their psychic link. Determine whether our abilities represent advantages they can exploit or threats they need to eliminate. We knew this would be complicated, Ethan replied mentally while continuing his conversation with Admiral Morrison. But we have legal protections under xenobiological research protocols, and Verdania's colonial charter guarantees settlement rights for endangered species preservation projects. The political maneuvering continued throughout their journey, with various human and alien governments proposing partnerships that would provide resources in exchange for access to magical abilities their children would inherit. Each proposal carried undertones suggesting their family would become subjects rather than partners, valuable specimens to be studied and controlled rather than autonomous beings with their own agenda. They don't understand, Lyralii said during one particularly tense negotiation session, that magical abilities can't be forced or extracted. The power comes from harmony between consciousness and natural forces, not from techniques that can be taught to unwilling students. They'll learn, Ethan said, watching Arya unconsciously stabilize the ship's atmospheric systems while playing with toys that responded to her emotional states. Our children will demonstrate that magical abilities work best when they're freely chosen rather than imposed through external pressure. The settlement on Verdania began with temporary shelters that Lyralii enhanced through biological magic, creating living structures that grew from the planet's native vegetation while incorporating technological systems that operated through conscious will rather than mechanical processes. Their home became a demonstration of how magic and science could work together to create sustainable living that enhanced rather than depleted environmental resources. Their second child, Marcus, was born within the first year of settlement, displaying abilities that complemented Arya's talents. Where she excelled at healing and atmospheric stabilization, he showed gift for enhancing technological systems through magical integration that made machines more efficient and responsive. The siblings worked together intuitively, their hybrid consciousness allowing collaborative problem-solving that neither human nor Sylvani psychology could achieve independently. "They're remarkable," said Dar. Elena Vasquez, the colonial xenobiologist who'd become their primary liaison with Verdania's government. "Marcus can make our agricultural processors operate at twice normal efficiency through some kind of conscious optimization, while Aria's healing abilities are revolutionizing our medical capabilities." "It's just the beginning," Ethan said, watching his children play in gardens that flourished under their unconscious magical influence. "Wait until we have enough hybrid children to establish stable magical ecosystems. The environmental benefits will transform how all species approach planetary development." Over the following years, their family expanded as Lyralii gave birth to children whose abilities covered the full spectrum of Sylvani magical disciplines: environmental manipulation, technological integration, consciousness bridging, and biological healing. Each child inherited unique combinations of human adaptability and Sylvani magical mastery, creating individuals capable of innovations that neither parent species could achieve alone. But the most significant development came when their oldest children reached adolescence and began displaying abilities that exceeded even Lyralii's expectations. Aria could now heal injuries that should have been fatal, while Marcus had learned to create technological innovations through magical inspiration that combined scientific method with mystical intuition. "They're not just preserving Sylvani abilities," Lyralii observed, watching their children collaborate on projects that incorporated both species' knowledge in entirely new ways. "They're evolving beyond what either of our people achieved independently." "Hybrid vigor," Ethan said, using scientific terminology to describe phenomena that transcended normal genetic principles. "The combination of human innovative thinking and Sylvani magical wisdom is creating possibilities neither species developed alone." The success of their family attracted attention from across the galaxy, with researchers and diplomats arriving to study the first successful magical technological integration society. But rather than becoming subjects of external research, the Starweaver Blackwood family established themselves as teachers and collaborators, sharing their knowledge while maintaining autonomy over their community's development. "We've received applications from 17 different species requesting assistance with environmental restoration projects," Ethan reported during one of their family planning sessions. "Our children's abilities could help heal worlds that have been damaged by industrial development or natural disasters." "Good," Lyralii said, her luminous eyes bright with satisfaction at seeing her desperate gamble succeed beyond her wildest hopes. The Sylvani always believed that magical abilities were meant to serve all conscious beings, not just those born with natural talent. Their 12th child, Luna, was born as Verdania's first generation of magical technological infrastructure reached maturity: cities that grew like living organisms, transportation systems that operated through conscious direction, and agricultural methods that enhanced planetary ecosystems rather than depleting them. Luna's birth completed the minimum viable population needed to sustain magical ecosystems independently, ensuring that Sylvani civilization would continue through hybrid offspring who carried the best aspects of both species' heritage. 12 children, Ethan said, holding Luna while feeling the magical energy that now connected their entire family in networks of consciousness that spanned multiple dimensions. From the last Sylvani to a thriving community that could revolutionize galactic civilization's approach to sustainable development. Not just 12 children, Lyralii corrected, watching their older offspring work together on projects that combined magic and science in ways that created new possibilities for conscious evolution. 12 bridges between species, 12 demonstrations that love can transcend biological boundaries when it's chosen freely rather than imposed through force. Standing in their garden while Verdania's twin suns set over landscape that flourished under their children's magical influence, Ethan marveled at how Lyralii's desperate request for mating had transformed into something that honored both their species while creating new forms of conscious partnership that had never existed before. "Any regrets about accepting my proposal?" Lyralii asked, her consciousness reaching out to touch his through bonds that had grown stronger with each year of shared partnership. "Only one," Ethan replied, pulling her closer while their children's laughter echoed through gardens that bloomed with impossible beauty. "I regret that it took a species extinction crisis for us to find each other." Perhaps, Wyralii said, with the wisdom that came from centuries of existence combined with the joy of finally having family to share it with, the universe arranges meetings between people who need each other when they're ready to appreciate what they're being offered. Around them, 12 remarkable children whose abilities bridged the gap between science and magic continued building a future where conscious will and natural forces could work together to create civilizations that enhanced rather than depleted the worlds they called home, proving that sometimes the most desperate requests for help become the foundation for the most beautiful forms of love.